Right. So here I'm watching this, okay? I'm watching this movie. Because part of Cop Gang is a prostitution site, right? So part of it is getting this, probably this TV or this movie. This would probably be the best way to get an understanding of the psychology of the chicks in high school, right? You see, if you see it, you'll see even like the social outcast pretty girl is still willing to have sex for money. Okay? The smart girl. And then the other chicks are willing to do it also. And that this is what it is. It's like they don't necessarily like they just it's like masturbating to them or something like that. It's like not anything. It doesn't mean anything to them. And so here's what kind of happens now. So essentially, okay, so essentially that stuff was essentially when chicks, babysitters, basically, they would just do that stuff on their own. Then they call it princessing, where they essentially they extort money out. But nowadays, the fathers they they deny it and shit. And so what's come of that is that nowadays these chicks they set up cameras. They'll set up cameras, and that then the high school gangbang guys that go around marketing themselves. They go around marketing themselves as like S&M gangbang groups. See, this is like what it is. It's like essentially what you'll see is like if you go on porn, and then you'll see this like nearby. Okay, so it's not all prostitution. Some are just sex freaks. Okay, women that are sex freaks. Lots of women that are sex freaks. And so essentially they get sick of the sleazy guys, and that then usually they compile like baseball players and football players. Those dudes don't ever go, they don't ever care about going around fucking women for money. Okay? And so essentially, female prostitution operates around getting gangbanged. It really does. It's like basically, it's like mom prostitution is like gangbangs by a bunch of high school dudes. And then, essentially, father prostitution is like 15, 16-year-old girls that do babysitting a lot of times. But then, essentially, the beginnings of it are to come in as a babysitter. And that then, eventually, it just becomes somebody they meet up with secretly, periodically for money. Right? And so, essentially, these women, these chicks in high school, they essentially becomes where they build up a shit ton of money for college, so that they don't have to work, so that they can buy clothes and shit. Okay, they essentially stockpile huge wads, like in this movie, huge wads of fucking clothes, right? For money, for clothes and jewelry and shit, and Whole Foods vegan food and drugs and because essentially most of them get everything paid for anyways. But yeah, they don't necessarily get the Gucci clothes and stuff. They don't necessarily. No, they have a whole systemized way of hiding it where most of the time in the past, a babysitter group of friends that do babysitting prostitution, They would usually start buying expensive clothes, then the mother would notice, and then usually mothers know how high school girls can be, basically. And so usually that gets found out with expensive jewelry around or clothes. And so nowadays they have a gang prostitution site. Essentially, it gets run out of the cop gang, and that the cop gang basically doesn't become cop gang until they fuck one of these high school girls. And so essentially, cop gang is kind of freaked out dads and freaked out cops. Yes. And that then it blossoms into essentially wives sometimes that get gangbanged by high school guys or younger high school guys. Or these S&M women that the cops a lot of the times are gangbanging. And that then essentially what happens is that it moves past this. It ends up pulling in mothers against drunk driving. Because everybody in high school blackmails, and everybody does the secret camera blackmailing methods. See, it's moved down from college, okay, because it's pretty prevalent in college. Now it's moved down to high schools, and now it's in the middle schools, and now it even filters into elementary schools, right? So essentially, like, a lot of what they do is the chicks run an extortion bling ring type of movie, and they basically have a babysitters club. And that's kind of the two avenues of that. They also market themselves to S&M clubbers to be getting their pedophile blackmail for the month. Also, pretty prevalent. So the whole idea is that this stuff exists in every single high school here in Tri-Cities. They all have their little groups, okay? Even the private school. So this is what I'm getting at. These people, okay, so I'm a millennial, and I'm 40. Up here in the Northwest, the reality is that millennials are a lot more prone to banging a high school chick. And so what used to be like, like up in Missoula, like you see these older dads, like over 40 dads, that would basically be the people with cops who would be in the Silk Road. And now, basically, if you go out to rainbow gatherings, there's like high school girls all over the place that are willing to fuck for money at any moment. And so, up here in the Northwest, most millennials they go to that a lot. It's like you could even go to like these festivals at the Gorge up here, and there you'd be able to find a high school kid, a chick, that would be willing to bang you for money. All you'd have to do is walk up and ask, and that you'd pretty much find one, pretty much instantly, pretty much everybody. It's just like so normalized that if you're willing to pay money, pretty much most of the high school chicks will like actually have sex if you just give them money. And so it's pretty common that everybody is like, that stuff essentially gets put into a centralized database that the cops are all in, and then that's kind of what starts up the cop gang, because essentially it becomes a huge blackmail system that all these other gangs, like the Mexican gangs around here, once they start like compiling huge databases in a centralized way, then these drug cartels and these Mexican mafias and shit, then that's the stuff that once they get enough, or once they get a certain group of people, then they start utilizing all their tech staff. And then that is what pushes those people into essentially the high-priced satanic S&M system that has prevention from those gangs and shit. And that then essentially it's always just people that don't have any money. And that slowly those high-priced prostitution systems have a quota to Satan, basically. There's a quota to Satan, and then if they don't pay, then essentially it gets transferred to like these Russian intelligence dark webs, or the Nazis, or the Chinese, or nowadays the Islamic drug groups. And so that's where pretty much the prevalence. So in this, when this stuff comes down, it'll end up coming down. They should probably figure out. Watch the movie The Babysitters. You'll basically see what the crime will be. And then essentially figure out some sort of boilerplate, run them all through jail kind of idea. And then have that promoted out to the community. Basically, because a lot of them will just have like multiple counts of banging high school chicks. Yeah. It's like, you know what? This is where I really wondered. Because the whole idea is that women, I know what was happening up in my townhouse. And I know that woman knew. Because I seen her give them the glary eye. Because she knew that they were trying to do that type of stuff at me. And I was a stay-at-home dad. And she knew that they were trying to do that at me. I seen her. I seen them ride by. And I seen women like glare at them. And I am hyper aware of everything that she's ever done. Her face, everything. Right? I noticed that. I was like, why is women glaring at those girls? Right? And so that is where I know what those girls were doing. But the whole idea is that they, in ways, were at the very beginnings of being scammed. And so they were given money a little bit at first, but after a while, they were just forced to have sex with guys all the time. And they weren't getting any money. See, that is what I researched about that. So when all these people start, this is like where these cops, their whole excuse. And it's like, you know what? I want to know who the counselors are. I want to know who the psychiatrists are. I want to know who the female cops are. I want to know who the female investigators are that blame high school girls for being tricked into prostitution. I want to know who normalizes that type of behavior. Those are pedophiles, and that they need to be fired and fucking thrown into jail. There was people talking, the little 14-year-old girls in this town, that they went to jail for just doing nudie pics. You people were banging high school kids. Pretty much. And so the whole idea is that essentially the satanic S&M, if the statute of what is it, statutory rape laws or something, if it's like 16 or something, then all the prostitutes will be 15, 14, or 13. So because it won't upload into their satanic S&M. It won't. That's like what those are built around. Okay, they're built around people uploading real blackmails. And so even the gangs know this. This is why they choose to be big cuckolders. It's why they do that. That's why they pay and prostitute a lot of money to do this sex switching stuff. When it gets to that, see, it starts out as just like banging a couple chicks, and then it progresses into where they have to kind of like, they have to do the satanic rape switching stuff. There's women that you gotta pay them a lot of money to do that. Basically, but that their system, that is acceptable in that system, and that they have to go to the specific women that do that. Okay? And so that is the difference. That's what they developed, okay? They developed that method. And that this fucking the pedophile method is to just be a pedophile. And then all those cops, they're not in big cuckoldings. They're not. They wouldn't be. Because in the past, they would have been allowed in big cuckoldings, but then they went around and busted all the drug dealers in. And so now they're not allowed. Well, there is a theoretical way, but it would require Satan to be standing right in front of you with like a gun or a knife in his hand. Basically. So just remember that like the gang system the cops use is the pedo one. And that they have to fucking, that when they, because that stuff, there's always the cybersecurity, the rules of Satan S&M are like, if you don't upload the blackmail power and the money and stuff, basically, if you don't upload that stuff every month, basically, then it starts to break down the whole database. And so, since everybody bangs fucking, you know, the whole idea is that sex freaks. See, these Mexican gangs, they're drug dealers. They're not sex freaks, they're drug addicts. And that's kind of the difference. I mean, that's basically the difference. It's like, instead of, they got lots of women to spooge in and shit, and that they all know what it means to be, like, blackmailed as a pedophile and shit, because they have slaves. They have slaves that do their tech stuff and shit. They have slaves that move their drugs around, and in their sight, if you get blackmailed as a pedophile, then you have to do all the shitty-ass jobs. And so that's not the money-making jobs, that's for sure. And that is what it is that they, you know, most of them can't do drugs after that shit, and most of them are drug addicts. So just remember that their system works in a way different way, and that you people do that cop gang shit that they use is made specifically for a highly researched, highly secretive pedophile prostitution system. That, instead of selling drugs, is meant for child brothels and satanic sex crazy freak shit. And that is where those people should just realize that that's the kind of shit. In the end, you guys develop some scam that's gonna have these chicks like not getting their money. You remember how I brought this up like 3 years ago? You people, a lot of those chicks sit there collecting tech bucks by banging every guy in the fucking world. Like 14-year-old chicks. They'll be going around banging as many dads and shit as they can. And that then, nowadays, the cops, they just won't, there's just no output of the money. Because they owe so much money. Whatever they get, whatever those chicks are doing, they're just part of the group fund. And that these cops have been running these voyeur sites to do police surveillance so intensely that the prostitute money that they get from these chicks just goes into paying the debts that are sitting in there because they're running up massive debts. And so then those chicks, that shit pisses them off. A lot of them have planned on paying for fucking college with that fucking money. And that is what it ends up being. And so, in ways, that's where there's somewhat of those chicks, they end up having these cops going, well, these chicks are going around blackmailing, blah, blah. And it's like, what type of child grooming? Cops have a tendency in cop gang to blame the victim for cops' problem. And the whole idea is that gangbang high school guys, those dudes, they're just part of the regular group of guys that are running up massive debt. So any money they get is basically to pay their own debt for using the S&M or taking out or using money in the S&M for stuff. See, when they bang chicks, that costs them money too. And that most of them end up being like little kitties. Meaning that they like little kids. The high school guys that gangbang moms and shit. They're like little kids. And so those are really expensive. See, a lot of them will go around gangbanging a bunch of moms to build up a bunch of money just to have sex with a little kitty. That's what those dudes do. And then essentially, the cops, they have a similar idea. They go around gang banging 20 and 30-year-old wives everywhere just to make enough money to be like manipulating some perfect little blonde Jesus girl at like 13, 12 or 13. And then they satanically sex labor. And that's what they pay their money for. Okay, so a lot of times around, and the whole idea is that as it goes along for years without anybody doing anything, then all the moms start turning into schizos. All the fathers start freaking out because they realize that because people start popping up blackmails at them. And they realize that the babysitter stuff was a huge mistake, so then they start getting really paranoid. And so then the cops start realizing that the little Jesus girl ends up like princessing over all of them, and then she'll start making them do things that they won't want to do. And then she'll start just blatantly narking it off everywhere. And then, as this stuff goes on, then there's less moms and less fathers that are banging people for money, and there's less moments for these high school guys to like bang. There's less gangbang moms, so they can't collect enough money. Once they do that, like kitty porn, or basically, once they do a kitty porn, essentially that's their blackmail that they recreate on a loop. And then usually they gangbang a bunch of moms as a high school group, as a group of 5 or 6 guys or something. And then, now that over time, those moms are the only moms. Essentially, they start suffering from massive psychological issues, and that they also suffer from the same thing that every porn addict suffers from, or sex addict, is that eventually it doesn't make them ejaculate after a while. And that when you couple no ejaculations with the fuck switching issue, then that makes them basically not want to do anything anymore. And so then, essentially, there's like a finite amount of gangbang moms. And so then, these high school gangbang groups, they can't get enough money to do the like extreme kiddie porn, blackmail and porn of that. And so then, that stuff starts pouring out into high schools, into people that are in the hookup side. It starts pouring out, and then everybody sees them being a little kiddie porner. and that is essentially social suicide. See, it's like kind of normalized to be like having sex in high school with like middle school. But when it comes to the kiddie stuff, those people are socially outcasted. And a lot of times people start narking it off and shit because, people being sluts or something in high school and middle school is kind of more common nowadays. But when people are doing like weird satanic like stuff to like little kids and shit, that's the stuff that they end up, mouths start moving. They do. Mouths start moving. And that then they're always like the most popular guys and shit. And that then that's where all of a sudden the schools like start covering the stuff up and shit. They start covering it up. They won't tell the parents of the kid or nothing. And so that is where it like sits in cop gang, and then it's like pretty much what a lot of people don't see is that the kiddie porn that they make with those kids, all those people are seeing is this segment of it. They don't see the segment where a bunch of cops are doing the same thing as the gangbang groups. They don't see the segment where the law club is coming up doing a pedo bang at the same time as everybody else on little kiddies. And so, and teacher groups that are basically in the law club. I mean, this is what it is. And so those people essentially had some sort of damaging blackmail around Silk Road bust. They all went and did a major kiddie pedo bang because they're all the leaders of the satanic S&M covering up system or prevention system on dark web. They did that because they all had already done things that Silk Road had. That's getting those new systems pulled that shit out. But then it requires those people to gather a bunch of money, and everybody just runs around banging moms and kids in high school and shit, all that stuff. And then those groups that essentially got the system at the beginning, a lot of times over time they don't have enough money. They owe too much money. And so then they're not able to do their kiddie bang. And then that stuff that it doesn't have the prevention because it literally requires those people to be reacquiring those systems every year. This is why the Mexican drug gangs, this is why they don't use those pedo versions of their gang site. This is why they don't use those. Because they have Mexican friends in the past that would have used those, and the same thing would have happened. And that time and time again for, better part of 10 years now. Time and time again. Same group. Oh, I got this pedo silk system. Oh, yeah. Within 7 years, that stuff will all be exposed. They'll be running away on a child trafficking route.